For over 30 years, two of the most photographed faces in America were linked together in a way that neither tabloids nor talk show hosts ever fully managed to explain. Michael Jackson, the undisputed king of pop, and Brooke Shields, one of the most famous child stars turned leading actresses of her generation, spent decades as confidants, occasional dinner companions, and depending on which headline you read in any given year, secret lovers, a doomed engagement, or simply two lonely famous kids who found each other by accident. The public never quite settled on a version of the story it believed. So today we're going back to the beginning, tracing exactly how this friendship started, what it actually meant to each of them, and why decades later, people are still trying to decide what it was. To understand why Michael Jackson and Brooke Shields gravitated toward each other, you have to understand what each of them had already lived through by the time they met. Michael was born in Gary, Indiana in 1958, and by the time he was still a child, he was already performing professionally as the lead singer of the Jackson 5. He spent his entire adolescence on stages, in recording studios, and under the strict management of his father, Joe Jackson. Michael would later describe, in numerous interviews throughout his life, a childhood defined less by play and more by rehearsal, criticism, and fear. He often said he never really had a normal childhood at all, no birthday parties with school friends, no ordinary days of simply being a kid. Several of his siblings backed up parts of this account over the years, describing Joe as a demanding and sometimes frightening figure who pushed his children hard toward stardom. Brooke Shields, born in 1965, entered the industry even earlier than Michael did. She began modeling as an infant and was a magazine fixture before she'd started grade school. By her early teens, she'd already starred in 3 major films that shaped, and in some ways complicated, her public image: Pretty Baby in 1978, The Blue Lagoon in 1980, and Endless Love in 1981. Each of these roles placed her as a minor at the center of adult-themed films that drew both praise for her acting and intense scrutiny over the subject matter. Behind the scenes, her mother, Terry Shields, managed nearly every aspect of her career. Brooke has written and spoken candidly in later years about how her mother's ambitions for her, combined with Terry's struggles with alcohol, created a chaotic and pressure-filled household, one where Brooke was frequently the primary breadwinner before she'd even become a teenager. So when these two eventually crossed paths, Brooke was about 13, Michael in his early 20s, they weren't simply two celebrities running into each other on a red carpet. They were two people who had spent their entire lives being managed, marketed, and watched, and who instinctively recognized something familiar in each other. Neither of them needed to explain what it felt like to have photographers waiting outside their front door, or what it meant to grow into your own identity, while millions of strangers already had an opinion about who you were. What made their bond durable wasn't red carpet chemistry, it was rooted almost entirely in privacy. Because Michael's fame had reached a level where a simple trip to a grocery store could trigger a crowd, his social life largely moved indoors. He would call Brooke, sometimes for long stretches, or invite her over to Havenhurst, his family's home, or later to Neverland. Brooke, in turn, would visit him or have him over to hers. Public appearances together were rare specifically because being public was the one thing neither of them could do easily. Michael repeatedly described feeling isolated despite constant company, surrounded by handlers, bodyguards, and fans, yet unable to have an unscripted conversation with someone who wasn't either working for him or hoping something from him. Brooke offered something rarer: familiarity, without an agenda. She wasn't chasing a career opportunity by knowing him, and he wasn't chasing anything from her either. Their time together, by both of their accounts over the years, tended to be low-key, talking, watching movies, or simply existing in a space where neither had to perform. This is also the period where speculation about a possible romance began to calcify into pop culture legend. Tabloids in the 1980s ran wild with theories, largely because the public had no context for a platonic friendship between a global music icon and a teenage actress that didn't fit into a will they, won't they narrative. The framing stuck for years, long after both of them had tried in various ways to clarify what their relationship actually was. If there's one single moment responsible for cementing the public's confusion about this relationship, it's Michael Jackson's live interview with Oprah Winfrey, broadcast from Neverland Ranch on February 10, 1993. The special drew an audience estimated at roughly 90 million viewers, making it one of the most watched interviews in the history of American television. During the conversation, Oprah asked Michael directly whether he was dating anyone, and Michael answered that he was dating Brooke Shields. He explained that they preferred spending time privately, visiting each other's homes rather than going out, because public outings for him had become nearly impossible. For most of the audience watching that night, this felt like confirmation of a rumor that had circulated for a decade. But there was a problem. Brooke hadn't agreed to be described that way, and she hadn't been consulted beforehand. When she later found out how Michael had characterized their relationship on live television in front of tens of millions of people, she was reportedly stunned. In interviews given afterward, and later in her own memoir, Brooke explained that she never considered the two of them a couple in any conventional sense. She cared for him deeply, but the label boyfriend and girlfriend wasn't one she recognized or had agreed to. The fallout wasn't dramatic or public in itself, but left her feeling embarrassed, since the comment reignited years of tabloid speculation without any warning or discussion between them. Adding fuel to an already complicated public narrative was a gift. At one point, Michael gave Brooke an expensive diamond ring. Unsure how to interpret it, she asked him outright whether he was proposing marriage. According to Brooke's later retelling, Michael simply smiled and told her no. He just wanted her to have something beautiful, something that would remind her how much he cared for her whenever she looked at it. Brooke has always described the moment as touching rather than romantic, but to a public already primed to see them as a couple, a piece of jewelry like that was impossible to interpret as anything other than a marriage rumor waiting to be confirmed. There's another anecdote from Brooke that reveals just how differently the two of them pictured their futures. At one point, Michael suggested they adopt a child together and raise that child jointly, without necessarily being a couple in the traditional sense. This wasn't an isolated impulse. Michael talked often across many interviews throughout the late 80s and early 90s about how badly he wanted to be a father and build a family of his own. Brooke, however, wanted something more conventional for herself, an independent adult life first, built on her own terms, before even considering starting a family. She turned him down, and in interviews afterward, she reflected that Michael sometimes imagined futures for the two of them that she had simply never signed on to. One of the clearest points where their lives diverged was Brooke's decision, in 1983, to attend Princeton University. It was an unusual choice for someone at the peak of a modeling and acting career, but Brooke wanted an education and, by her own account, a taste of a normal life, dorm rooms, lecture halls, and the experience of being just another student rather than a magazine cover. She graduated in 1987 with a degree in Romance languages. Brooke has said that Michael genuinely struggled to understand this decision. Having spent virtually his entire life inside the machinery of fame, with bodyguards, handlers, and a level of celebrity that made ordinary experiences like walking down a street essentially impossible, the idea of voluntarily stepping back from stardom to live in a dorm and go to class made little sense to him. It wasn't a rejection of their friendship, but it highlighted just how differently they each defined a meaningful life. As Brooke pursued her degree and re-entered acting afterward, and as Michael threw himself into an increasingly demanding touring and recording schedule, their day-to-day contact naturally slowed. There wasn't a dramatic falling out, just two people whose paths for a while simply stopped running side by side as closely as they once had. To understand the next chapter of Michael Jackson's life, and why it would eventually overshadow everything else about his public image, you have to understand Neverland Ranch. In 1988, Michael purchased the Sycamore Valley Ranch in Santa Barbara County for a reported $17 million and quickly renamed it Neverland after the fictional home of Peter Pan. Over the following years, he poured tens of millions more dollars into transforming the 2,700-acre property into something closer to a private amusement park than a celebrity estate. It featured a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, bumper cars, a carousel, its own movie theater, elaborately landscaped grounds, and a private zoo stocked with exotic animals, including elephants and giraffes. For a stretch of years, Neverland represented something genuinely generous. Michael regularly invited seriously ill children and underprivileged families to visit free of charge, and for a portion of the public, the ranch symbolized his desire to give children experiences he felt his own childhood had denied him. But that same openness, inviting children, including children he wasn't related to stay at his home, eventually became the focal point of the most serious accusations he would ever face. In August of 1993, just months after the Oprah interview, 13-year-old Jordan Chandler accused Michael of abuse. The allegations emerged amid a dispute involving Jordan's father and rapidly escalated into simultaneous criminal and civil proceedings. Investigators searched Jackson's properties, including Neverland, and the case dominated global headlines for months. Despite an extensive investigation, prosecutors ultimately did not file criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. The civil case, however, proceeded, and in January 1994, Jackson reached a confidential settlement with the Chandler family, widely reported to fall between $15 and $20 million. The settlement included no admission of guilt, and Jackson consistently and publicly denied every allegation against him. Nearly a decade later, in 2003, British journalist Martin Bashir released a documentary called Living with Michael Jackson, filmed largely at Neverland. In it, viewers watched Jackson holding hands with a 13-year-old cancer survivor named Gavin Arvizo, while Jackson explained his belief that sharing his home with children was simply an act of kindness. The documentary triggered immediate backlash, and within months, the Arvizo family alleged that Gavin had been abused. By November 2003, prosecutors in Santa Barbara County had charged Jackson with multiple offenses, including lewd acts upon a minor and false imprisonment. The resulting trial, held in Santa Maria, California, stretched on for nearly 6 months and drew intense worldwide media coverage. Jackson's defense team, led by attorney Thomas Mesereau, challenged the prosecution's timeline and presented evidence, including travel records and testimony from former Neverland staff, suggesting the Arvizo family had moved freely in and out of the property during the period they claimed to have been confined. After roughly 32 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict came down on June 13, 2005. Jackson was acquitted on all 14 counts. The acquittal ended the criminal case, but it did nothing to repair the financial and reputational damage the years of legal battles had caused. His legal defense alone had cost tens of millions of dollars, and combined with years of declining touring income, heavy borrowing against his assets, and the enormous ongoing cost of maintaining Neverland, Jackson's estimated debt at the time ran between $400 and $500 million. To dig out from under that financial pressure, Jackson announced a concert residency titled This Is It at London's O2 Arena in March 2009. What began as a planned 10 shows ballooned due to overwhelming demand into 50 sold-out performances, a comeback on a scale that would have dwarfed nearly anything else in his career. It never happened. On June 25, 2009, just weeks before rehearsals were set to culminate in opening night, Michael Jackson died at the age of 50 from acute intoxication involving propofol and benzodiazepines at a rented home in Los Angeles. His death instantly shifted the conversation away from debt and legal controversy and toward the management of one of the most valuable entertainment estates ever assembled. Estate executors restructured his finances, expanded licensing deals, and built new revenue streams through posthumous albums, documentaries, and stage productions, including partnerships with Cirque du Soleil. For years afterward, Forbes ranked Jackson among the highest-earning deceased celebrities in the world. Debate over his legacy never fully settled, either. In 2019, a documentary titled Leaving Neverland brought forward detailed allegations from 2 men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, reigniting global conversation about Jackson's history. The Jackson estate rejected the claims, pointed to the 2005 acquittal, and pursued legal action against the network that aired it. More than 3 decades after Neverland first became a symbol of childlike fantasy, it remains just as strongly associated with one of the most polarizing debates in entertainment history. Through all of this, the 1993 allegations, the settlement, the 2005 trial, one person conspicuously absent from the public conversation was Brooke Shields. She never launched a defense of Michael in the press, and she never distanced herself from him publicly either. Instead, she chose silence, repeatedly declining to comment on allegations she had no first-hand knowledge of. This restraint held steady even during the Santa Maria trial in 2005, when several other celebrities either testified for the defense or made public statements of support. Brooke wasn't called as a witness and never weighed in on the evidence being presented. Given how thoroughly the media had spent years painting her as one of the people closest to him, her silence during his most difficult years stood out. Everything changed on June 25, 2009. In the days following Michael's death, as plans came together for a public memorial at the Staples Center, Brooke received a call from Katherine Jackson, Michael's mother, personally asking her to speak at the service. According to Brooke, Katherine explained that she believed Michael would have wanted his old friend there. Brooke has said she was moved by the request, but also caught off guard, since she had long assumed one member of the family, Joe Jackson, had never really accepted her presence in Michael's life. Rather than avoid the issue, she addressed it directly before the memorial, later recalling that she told Joe plainly that neither of them had ever particularly liked the other, before thanking him for raising the son who became one of her closest friends. When Brooke took the stage at the televised memorial on July 7, 2009, she didn't focus on Michael's records, tours, or global fame. She spoke instead about the man she knew away from the cameras, describing him as one of a kind and pushing back gently against the decades of tabloid framing that had painted their friendship as strange or hard to explain. To her, there had never been anything unusual about it all. She told the audience that whenever the two of them were together, they were simply, as she put it, two little kids having fun. In the years since, Brooke has continued to describe Michael in similar terms: funny, generous, gentle, and above all, lonely in a way most people never really grasped. She's pointed out that many of the behaviors the public mocked as eccentric were, in her view, attempts to carve out something resembling an ordinary life in the only way still available to him. In private, behind gates, away from the version of fame that made even a walk through a shopping mall impossible. When asked directly how she reconciled her affection for him with the accusations he faced over the years, she said honestly that she wishes she knew the full truth, because only then could she feel comfortable rendering a verdict either way. What emerges from 3 decades of interviews, memoirs, and public statements isn't a tidy answer to what Michael Jackson and Brooke Shields were to each other. It's something messier and, in a way, more human. Two extraordinarily famous people who found in each other one of the only relationships in their lives that didn't come with strings attached, even as the rest of the world spent 30 years trying to force their friendship into a shape it never actually had.